Behind every headline is a story. This is Behind the Trend. Short stories, big insights. The silence and the storm. It begins with silence. The vast white silence of the Arctic. For 70 years, the relationship between the United States and the Kingdom of Denmark has been much like the ice of Greenland itself. Solid, enduring, and largely quiet. It was a certainty in an uncertain world. But recently, the wind changed. A storm broke out. Not a storm of weather, but of words. It was a diplomatic thunderclap that rolled across the Atlantic, shaking the foundations of the post-World War II order. It started with a headline that many thought was a joke, a dark comedy of modern politics. The President of the United States wanted to buy Greenland. But as the laughter died down, a stark reality settled in. This was not a joke. The Trump administration was denouncing the claim that Greenland rightfully belongs to the U.S. They were challenging the very concept of sovereignty. And in response, the Danish government was forced to issue a statement that should never have been necessary between friends, writing clearly that the island actually belongs to its people. Tonight, we step behind the headlines. We sit down with Danish Member of the European Parliament, Anders Vistisen, to understand the deep human frustration and the geopolitical danger lurking behind this proposal. This is not just a story about land. It is a story about memory, about gratitude, and about the fragile trust that holds our world together. The annoyance of empire. Imagine you are a homeowner. You have lived in your house for generations. And then, every few months, your neighbor, a neighbor you consider your best friend, announces loudly to the neighborhood that they intend to buy your house, whether you are selling or not. This is the reality facing Danish lawmakers today. When we asked Anders Vistisen how seriously they take these threats from Washington, his answer was a masterclass in diplomatic understatement. He told us that, of course, it is a bit annoying that every 2 months or so, the American president claims part of the Danish kingdom. A bit annoying. It sounds polite. But listen to the frustration beneath those words. Vistisen admits that while nobody really expects U.S. Marines or other military forces to engage a NATO-allied country, the mere fact that we have to ask the question reveals a great frustration in Denmark. Why? Because allies do not buy each other, and allies certainly do not invade each other. Yet the question hangs in the air. What if? What if the unthinkable happened? What if the United States decided to make a move? According to Denmark's Prime Minister, such a move would be catastrophic. It would signify an end to not only the alliance, but also the entire regional security apparatus established at the end of World War II. It would be the unraveling of 70 years of peace. As Vistisen puts it, while there is little doubt that the U.S. military could physically invade, politically, it would be a collapse of the NATO alliance to see one NATO ally attack another NATO ally's territory. Obviously, to understand why this is happening, we have to look at the logic driving the White House. It is a logic that views the world not as a community of nations, but as a risk board. The loudest voice in this push has been Stephen Miller, a top aide to the president. Miller has been ramping up his rhetoric, especially following military operations in Venezuela. His argument is stark and transactional. He claims that the U.S. needs Greenland from the standpoint of national security. He argues that for the United States to secure the Arctic region and to protect and defend NATO interests, obviously Greenland should be part of the United States. Obviously. That is the word that stings. In the eyes of the administration, a sovereign people obviously belong to someone else. But Vistisen points out a glaring double standard in this worldview. There is a great discrepancy between the situation in a hostile nation like Venezuela and a very long-standing ally like Denmark. Denmark and the U.S. have been partners for more than 70 years. The U.S. State Department has acknowledged Danish sovereignty over Greenland numerous times in signed treaties. There is no ambiguity here. There is no legal loophole. There is really no doubt that the territory of Greenland belongs in the Kingdom of Denmark, and the only people who can change that are the Greenlanders themselves. It is a political decision for the Greenland people to take, without any interference from overseas, the memory hole. So if the legal argument fails, what about the strategic argument? Stephen Miller claims the U.S. must own the land to protect it. He implies that without ownership, the Arctic is vulnerable. When we presented this argument to Anders Vistisen, his reaction was one of profound disbelief. He told us that it is very hard to argue with people who have so little knowledge and apparently are oblivious to the history of Greenland. So little knowledge. It is a devastating critique. Because the history Vistisen refers to is not ancient history. It is living memory. Here is the truth that the administration seems to have forgotten. The United States has already had the chance to have all the military capabilities they want on Greenland for more than 70 years. They didn't need to buy the island to be there. The door was open. The welcome mat was out. But what did the United States do with that access? Since the Cold War, they have closed down more than 30 military installations and bases in Greenland. They dismantled them. They left. They reduced their footprint until they were only keeping one left. This is the crux of Vistisen's rebuttal. If the U.S. assessment is that there is a lack of military capabilities in Greenland, the first question Stephen Miller should answer as an advisor is, why did you leave those 30 bases then? You were there. You decided that you didn't need to be there, and now you complain that you don't have military presence anymore. It is a logic that dissolves upon contact with reality. Vistisen reminds us that the U.S. can resume that presence tomorrow. They can do it without attacking a NATO ally. They can do it without infringing on a friendly country like the Kingdom of Denmark. The rationale behind this hostile takeover lacks factual foundation. It creates a crisis where none needs to exist: blood and sacrifice. But there is something deeper here than bases and treaties. There is the human heart of the alliance. When you treat a friend like a piece of real estate, you do not just break a contract, you break a bond. We asked Mr. Vistisen about the commitment between these two nations, and he reminded us of a moment in history that should bring every American to a pause. He reminded us of the only time Article 4 and the NATO treaty have been activated. It wasn't activated to save Denmark. It wasn't activated to save Europe. It was activated on behalf of the USA when you were attacked on 9/11. Think back to that day, the smoke rising from New York, the fear, the uncertainty. In that moment of American vulnerability, Denmark did not hesitate. They did not ask for payment. They came to the aid of the U.S. They sent their sons and daughters to war. Vistisen reminds us that Denmark sent troops both to Iraq and Afghanistan. They fought in the dust and the heat for American security. They stood by the U.S. when the world was falling apart. And this is why the current rhetoric cuts so deep. This is why the frustration in Copenhagen is so palpable. In return for that loyalty, in return for answering the call when the U.S. was on its knees, Denmark is now being told that their sovereignty is up for negotiation. The only time the treaty has actually been activated, it has been to aid the U.S. And yet, today, there are very many statements coming from Washington that have gone contrary to the Treaty of NATO. A lonely horizon. The damage being done here is not temporary. It is structural. It is changing the psychology of the Western world. Anders Vistisen shares a realization that is dawning on leaders across Europe, a realization that the era of blind trust is over. He tells us plainly, I think many people in Europe already now have come to the realization that American security guarantees are not as valuable as during the Cold War. Listen to those words again, not as valuable. For decades, Europe rested under the American umbrella. But now, Vistisen says they realize they cannot rely on that indefinitely. The erratic behavior, the threats to buy territory, the ignorance of history, it has all taken a toll. Europe is waking up to a new, lonely reality where they must be able to make their own security guarantees. They are looking at their maps and they are looking at their sometimes troubling neighbors to the east, and they are realizing they may have to face them alone. In the end, this is a story about so little knowledge having so much consequence. It is a story about a superpower forgetting that its strength comes not just from its missiles, but from its friends. Denmark has been a long-standing ally. They have kept the watch in the north. They have bled in the sands of the Middle East. They have honored their treaties. Now the question is, will America honor its own? You can open a base. You can close a base. But you cannot buy loyalty. As the political winds shift in Washington, the people of Denmark and the people of Europe are learning a hard lesson. The ice of Greenland is cold, but the shoulder being turned toward America's oldest allies is colder still. Because every trend has a deeper story. Behind the trend, short stories, big insight.